Picture this. You're standing on a shoreline at night. The ocean looks calm, but when you step in, the water burns like acid. Every wave carries someone else's rage, someone else's shame, someone else's emptiness, and before you know it, you're drowning in emotions that were never yours. Have you ever felt like someone turned you into their emotional dumpster, where their rage, their shame, their emptiness poured into you until you could barely recognize yourself? That is the hidden cost of being an empath. You don't just feel, you absorb. You become the container for what others refuse to face. And when the one in your life is a narcissist, that container fills with poison fast. Carl Jung called this descent the night sea journey, a plunge into psychological darkness where everything you thought was solid dissolves. But here's the terrifying truth. The most important part of this journey is not the collapse. It's who you become when you crawl out of it alive. Because survival is not healing. Survival is transformation. Survival is when the empath stops being food for the narcissist and becomes something the narcissist never expected. Immune. Untouchable. A presence so changed that simply standing in the same room forces others to face the shadows they've been hiding. The empath who survives doesn't return to who they were. They cross a threshold and emerge as a new archetype, what Jung hinted at but never named out loud. I call it the shadow walker. Someone who has stared into the abyss, carried the rage and shame of others, and come back with eyes that can no longer be deceived. In this video, I'm going to walk you through exactly how this metamorphosis happens. First, we'll uncover why empaths become unconscious shadow containers in the first place. Then we'll descend into the phase Jung described as negredo, the blackening, the death of the false self. And finally, we'll rise into the emergence of the shadow walker, an identity that carries sensitivity wrapped in steel. Along the way, I'll give you the shadow immunity protocol, a 3-step practice for making sure you never again absorb poison that doesn't belong to you. So the question isn't just, who do you become after absorbing the narcissist's darkness and surviving? The deeper question is this: now that you've been remade, what will you do with the power that darkness left behind? Carl Jung once observed, "The healthy man does not torture others, it is the tortured who become torturers." But there's a third category he left in the shadows, the empath, the one who neither tortures nor retaliates, but silently absorbs. Instead of passing pain forward, they take it inward. They become the container. Think about what that really means. From childhood, many empaths were trained, not consciously but instinctively, to read the unspoken. A father's silence before an outburst. A mother's sigh that carried more weight than words, the crackle in the air before conflict erupted. Long before they knew the language of psychology, they knew the language of tension. And the only way to survive that atmosphere was to tune themselves like instruments, vibrating with every shift in mood, trying to regulate chaos by becoming the mirror others needed. That survival strategy works in the short term. It keeps the family system intact. It prevents explosions. But it also wires the nervous system to believe, my worth depends on how well I carry emotions that aren't mine. By adulthood, the empath has mastered this invisible labor. When a partner projects shame, they swallow it whole. When a friend offloads rage, they metabolize it like poison in their own bloodstream. When a narcissist enters their life, the cycle reaches its most dangerous form. Every projection, every unacknowledged shadow, is dumped onto them until they can't tell where the other person ends and they begin. This is what Jung called participation mystique, a blurred boundary between self and other, where identity dissolves under the weight of projections. The empath becomes less a person than a psychic landfill. Their rage becomes your anxiety. Their emptiness becomes your depression. Their shame becomes your self-doubt. And because the empath is so used to living this way, they often mistake it for love, for loyalty, for being the strong one. Here's the cruel irony. The narcissist exploits this vulnerability not by accident, but by instinct. The narcissist's entire psychology is organized around denying their own darkness. They can't bear the thought of being flawed, so they cast the flaw into you. They tell you you're selfish, when they're the one consuming your every ounce of energy. They accuse you of being too sensitive, when in reality, your sensitivity is the very radar keeping them afloat. And each time you absorb, they feel lighter and you feel heavier. It's a rigged system. One where the empath is drafted into service as the host body for another's shadow. And it works until the empath breaks. Because no vessel, no matter how porous, can carry someone else's psychic toxins forever. So let me ask you directly, Have you ever walked away from a conversation, a fight, a relationship, feeling emotions you knew weren't yours? That's not intuition, it's infection. And it's the first step in the empath's descent into the psychological underworld. The alchemists called the first stage of transformation nigredo, the blackening, the breaking apart of what once seemed whole. In Jungian psychology, this is the moment when the false self, the people-pleasing, endlessly absorbing, endlessly giving persona, finally begins to collapse. For an empath, nigredo doesn't always look dramatic from the outside. You still go to work, you still answer messages, you may still smile, but inside you feel like something essential has rotted away. You look in the mirror and think, I know this face, but I don't know this person anymore. This collapse shows up in small but terrifying ways. You walk away from conversations carrying guilt or shame that you know didn't start in you. Your body reacts, tight chest, knots in your stomach, sleepless nights, not because of your own choices, but because you've absorbed someone else's storm. You feel dread in quiet moments, as if waiting for an attack that never announces itself. This is the empath's infection stage, what Jung described as psychological poisoning. Someone else's rage becomes your anxiety. Someone else's emptiness becomes your depression. Someone else's shame becomes your self-doubt. It feels like you're dissolving. But here's the hidden truth. This dissolution is not the end. It's the beginning. Jung said, there is no coming to consciousness without pain. The pain of nigredo is the psyche forcing you to stop living as a sponge, soaking up what doesn't belong to you. To make this vivid, imagine a dream. You are sitting at a long wooden table. In front of you lies a black cloth. 3 words are stitched into it in glowing thread: guilt, rage, shame. Each time you touch one of the words, the thread burns, the letters crumble, and the dust falls into a cup beside you. You keep going until the cloth is empty and the cup is heavy with ash. Then you notice the ash isn't just dirt, it sparkles. It has become salt. That is nigredo. It's the painful burning away of illusions, turning poison into something usable. What once weighed you down begins to change form. You're no longer an unconscious sponge. You're learning to become a conscious container. Here's the difference. A sponge absorbs without choice and loses itself. A container holds without becoming what it carries. When you reach this stage, your body begins to notice tiny signals. You hear a familiar phrase, if you really loved me, you'd... And instead of rushing to defend, something in you freezes and says, wait, that doesn't belong to me. Your nervous system is growing what I call shadow antibodies, the instinct to reject manipulation before it takes root. The first attempts feel shaky. You say no to a demand and wait for the world to explode, but nothing happens. You delay a reply and discover you're still safe. You stop over-explaining and the silence feels terrifying, but also liberating. That silence, that ache, is not proof you're failing. It's proof you're waking up. Nigredo is both death and labor. Death of the false self that was built on carrying others. Labor of the true self that knows this is mine, that is not. It hurts, yes. It feels lonely. But each time you refuse to absorb, each time you name what is not yours, it's like another grain of salt drops into the chalice. Grain by grain, you are rebuilding yourself, not as the sponge who disappears, but as the vessel who endures. The deepest transformation of the empath doesn't end at survival, nor even at strength. True transformation lies in integration. Because surviving the narcissist's darkness is not only about cutting ties or building walls, it is about learning how to hold both light and shadow within yourself without being destroyed by either. Imagine 2 magnets, one of light, one of shadow. Most people run toward the light and away from the shadow, but that only creates imbalance. What Jung revealed, and what the empath's lived experience proves, is that real wholeness comes when the 2 poles are acknowledged, embraced, and held together. Integration is the act of saying, yes, I have been scarred, yes, I have been poisoned, and yet I will not deny those parts. I will use them. This is where the empath becomes paradoxical, soft and fierce, loving and discerning, open yet deeply protected. And paradox is not weakness. It is the mark of maturity. It is what allows the survivor to walk into spaces where manipulation once thrived, and instead of shrinking, their presence alone destabilizes the game. But how does this integration really happen? It happens in stages, and each stage feels almost like a rebirth. First, there is awareness, realizing that what you carried for years, the guilt, the shame, the self-doubt, was never yours. Then comes grief, mourning not only the years lost, but also the self you used to be before the narcissist's grip. After grief, there is reclamation, choosing piece by piece to take back your identity, your voice, your power. And finally comes transcendence, using the very wounds as gateways into deeper wisdom. Take, for example, the empath who once believed that love meant unconditional giving. They gave until they disappeared. After integration, their love changes form. They still love deeply, but now their love has edges, clarity, and strength. It is no longer a love that says, "Take all of me so you can survive." It becomes a love that says, "I will walk with you, but I will not carry what is yours." This is the alchemy, the turning of blind sacrifice into conscious compassion. And this shift is not only psychological, it is physical, even cellular. Survivors often describe how their nervous system itself changes. The body, once trained to respond instantly to every emotional signal around it, begins to slow down. A raised voice no longer triggers panic. A manipulative guilt trip no longer takes root. It is as though the body has grown its own antibodies against toxicity. This is what Jung would call the psyche's immune system, the ability to recognize poison and reject it before it spreads. From here, something remarkable unfolds. The empath doesn't just heal for themselves. They become what we might call a living mirror. Their presence forces others to see themselves clearly, not because the empath lectures or exposes them, but because projection no longer sticks. A narcissist's manipulation bounces back like a shadow with nowhere to land. Ordinary people sense it too. They may feel unsettled in your presence or deeply comforted, depending on how much of their own shadow they are willing to face. This is where the survivor becomes more than survivor. They become a carrier of what Jung called individuation energy, the kind of consciousness that not only frees the self, but ripples outward into the collective. It's no accident that people who've endured and integrated deep psychological darkness often become guides, healers, or simply anchors of authenticity for others. They radiate an unmistakable depth, a kind of gravity that draws people in. But integration is not the end of suffering. Old wounds still ache, memories still surface, triggers still arrive. The difference is that they no longer define you. You can hold them, even honor them, without drowning. Integration means saying, "This pain shaped me, but it does not imprison me." Think of a tree that has been struck by lightning. The scar remains carved deep into the bark, but the tree does not die. Instead, it grows around the scar, sometimes even stronger because of it. That scar becomes part of its identity, not something to hide, but something that testifies to survival. This is the empath's soul after integration, scarred but stronger, carrying both shadow and light in one living body. And perhaps this is the greatest paradox. The narcissist, in trying to destroy you, unknowingly forged you into something indestructible. They thought they were consuming your light, but they ended up tempering it into a sharper, more radiant flame. They thought they were silencing your voice, but they forced you to discover the voice that cannot be manipulated. They thought they were breaking you, but they became the unwilling catalyst for your individuation. In this way, integration is not just healing, it is sacred. Because through it, you discover that you were never only empath, never only victim, never only survivor. You are all of these and more. You become paradox made flesh. And paradox held consciously is nothing less than wholeness. The truth is this: the empath who survives does not simply return to who they were before. That person is gone. What emerges is a paradox, tender and fierce, soft yet unbreakable. You are no longer just a sponge of other people's shadows. You are a presence that carries both darkness and light in one body. And this paradox is not weakness, it is power. It means you can walk through rooms that once consumed you and remain whole. It means you can love deeply without disappearing, and see through illusions without losing compassion. 3 truths must be carried with you from this journey. First, do not deny your wounds. They are not shame, they are proof that you survived. Each scar is a doorway into wisdom that only you now hold. Second, do not harden into stone. Closing your heart is unfinished alchemy. True gold is not cold. True gold is light that has passed through fire and still shines warm. And third, use your new vision. It is not given only to protect yourself, but to illuminate others still trapped in shadows. Your presence alone can spark recognition in those who feel hopeless. You become the living reminder that survival can become transformation. So when we ask, who does the empath become after absorbing the narcissist's darkness and surviving? The answer is clear. No longer victim, not only survivor, but something beyond. An awakened paradox, proof that the soul cannot be destroyed. If you once carried someone else's darkness, type in the comments, "I became the shadow walker." And if this path of transformation resonates with you, subscribe for the next exploration into philosophy's darkest mysteries, where we face the shadows not to be consumed but to discover who we truly are.